welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hi, welcome to Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast. I'm really excited to welcome back Elizabeth Rose Quinn, who wrote one of my favorite books of last year, which was Follow Me, which is a book that I'm forever telling everybody to read. And when they read it and they get they're just like, wait, what? What happened? What? Which is, I hope the reaction you were going for when you wrote it.
Yeah, it was. It was like, I just want, what if this is the only book I ever get to write? Why don't I just turn it up to 11? Like, I'm not trying to make a series. I'm not trying to do anything other than entertain myself. So I just was like, I'm putting it all out there and hopefully it works for some people. And luckily it did. And I'm thrilled.
So this is a very different book, but it's also very, very good. I have so many thoughts and questions about it, but I'm going to invite you to summarize Payback in your own words before we really dig in and start talking about it.
Okay, so Payback takes place in a very particular setting, which is crucial. It takes place in what is essentially a luxury women's prison. These are real prisons. They're all around the country. They totally exist, where if you commit a crime, but you got the money, you can pay to go to jail on the weekends. And so this takes place in one of those jails in Los Angeles. And the inmates have come on, the day after Christmas, and they're going to be there till New Year's Eve in that dead week. And they have this really terrible CO that kind of makes all their lives a misery, but they're just kind of getting through. And then they wake up the next morning after their first night there, and their CO has been murdered. And so suddenly they realize, oh no, one of us did it. And we have to figure out who it was before release day on New Year's Eve. Otherwise, no one's going to take the time to figure out who did it. They're just going to go, you all go to state. So, and that's it.
So first of all, I think one of the things that really surprised me, and I don't want to dwell on this too long, because I want to talk about like the characters, but was that this was a real thing.
Yeah,
I did not realize that until I looked it up, and then I was like, oh, she's writing about something real. How did you find out about this?
I was talking to a lawyer and they mentioned it as an option, like an alternative to incarceration. And it was just this record scratch moment of, I'm sorry, what did you just say? What? And it was like this combination of how has no one ever heard of this and how is it literally everywhere? There's not like one of these, they're everywhere. But then also, I mean, for me, I find, the carceral industrial complex to be so deeply, deeply harmful to the people that get trapped in it. And so there were some ways where I wanted to highlight and play with the privilege of what this looks like, but also to say, why isn't this available for everybody? Like, I think there's a lot of people who could benefit from an alternative to incarceration where they lose their family, they lose their house, they lose their car, they lose their job. And so I don't want it to be so much as this is immoral that this exists. I think my point of view is what's immoral is that we don't offer it to everybody. And then it just becomes something that if you're rich, you get to do it. And that's what I think is immoral.
No, I think you bring up a really good point there. And really, again, like there's so many facets of incarceration that you could consider immoral. You know, and again, like the idea of like a prison for profit is, where it's a problem. Like you're profiting off of, basically people who are
Have no alternative.
yeah, exactly. But this was really interesting because so first of all, you have a group of characters who are the women who are all there for different reasons. And you're all kind of trying to get to know who they are. Like one of them, you meet her for the first time and you're just like, okay, she's kind of like, like a party girl who got herself into some trouble. And then there's like the disgraced nurse and the nun. And it's like, okay, is this gonna be Orange is the New Black all over again? It's not. It's really just a very I think it's a much tighter and quicker story and I don't know better. Uh but no offense to people who are Orange is the New Black fans, but what I like is the CEO himself is a really interesting character because it's like you really kind of get to know his backstory first.
Mhm.
And it's not like what you necessarily expect. He's somebody who was able to sort of the people recognize that he thought differently and he behaved differently. But then he also recognized it and he recognized a way to use it to his advantage in asserting authority and power and control over people, which is awful, especially like if your job is to be, what he's doing. So to say that, yeah, everybody kind of had a motive is pretty clear. But then you also have another character, Russell, who is a male inmate who was transferred to this prison for reasons that are kind of like, what's going on here? Like, what's Stephen being the CEO? What's he playing at? Why is this guy here? And he comes from like an actual prison, a men's prison.
Yeah.
And obviously there's distrust also between the women and him because they're like, well, where did he come from? Where did the setup for the characters sort of come from for you? And Russell's involvement, was that always part of the story?
Yeah, I think in terms of like what the women, how those characters came to be, I think a lot of it was just like what would actually allow you to be in this prison? Like what kind of crimes have we decided are safe or are not safe, right? And then also playing with this idea, particularly with the character Aisha, where she's like, okay, I got, picked up for doing XYZ. I never actually stopped doing those things, but I had the money to reform. I had the money to perform accountability while I'm still doing everything I was doing, right? That there's so much about this that do you have the funds and the time and the support system to jump through all the hoops? And if you do, then you kind of tick enough boxes that the court system will be like, we've decided you're a good one, right? And then on the flip side, to have somebody, I can't remember when Russell came into it actually, but I think there was a way where I thought if I don't actually bring in what the carceral system that we're familiar with looks like, I felt like that was kind of doing a disservice to what I was trying to do, right? It was kind of ignoring the elephant in the room. But I think it also really allowed me to play with this idea that because they are able to afford, the women are able to afford to be in a pay to stay prison, they don't think that they're as bad as Russell. They think they're better than him. And a way for me to kind of have the reader start with this is who I think is a good person and this is who I think is a bad person, and then to kind of poke at that and stress test that and tease it as information is revealed to say, why did you assume that was a good person? Why did you assume they were a bad person? Like that's not actually about them. Like to kind of pull the reader in a way that didn't feel, like I'm scolding, but more just to say, I really want to take our first impression and then flip everything to say, well, what's underneath this rock?
So which of the women came first when you started coming together and writing this story?
I think Janet came first. Janet and Cami came first in the sense of like people who kind of have a very particular way that they present to the world. And who's all peace and love and yoga and everything's magical, but then you turn out like, and this isn't a spoiler so much, is that she's not that simple, right? She's not somebody who's just like everything is peace and love, but that's what works for her as she kind of wanders the world, is to present that. And Cammy to have this idea of being this kind of, like bimbo airhead party girl, but you realize very quickly that's not who she is at all. And to have this be a place where you could see the characters interact with her and be like, oh my God, like what they see on the surface, they're just like, this is ridiculous. And then you see that same thing happen from her perspective, and what's happening, behind the eyes is so much more interesting. And I think that just became a version of what is the most compelling version of revealing each character. And so like Aisha was the next one, in terms of like, you do have the quote unquote hardened criminal who's in there, who is just like really like pragmatic, doesn't give a shit, is just here to like do what she needs to do. But when you actually get to know her, it's like, oh, this center of her is actually one of the softest. And so it felt like that was the kind of scaffolding of each character. And then I wanted to like find what is like a crime that would make sense for them to be there. And then what depth do we find as we move forward through the story?
I definitely enjoyed it. I enjoyed I have to say, like, there were other things too that I enjoyed, and I enjoyed the dynamic between them, like especially with the nurse. Was that Dee Dee? Now I'm trying
Yeah.
to, yeah, okay,
Yeah.
good. I was like, please tell me I'm not mixing their names up. Yeah, like, who, like, she's very conscious about her image. And yeah, she's in prison on the weekends, but she doesn't want to do any service like at the hospital she used to work at, because her husband's on the board. It's just very like, it felt very real and very funny at the same time, where you're just like, lady, come on, but just kind of watching them react to this guy, like, okay, this is not a good person who died, but also just sort of be like thoroughly aware that they have the privilege of being in this pay to stay type situation, and they don't want to go elsewhere. And then Stephen on the, Russell on the other hand, Stephen being the dead CO, Russell on the other hand being like, I am staying away from all of you because I'm already where you don't want to be.
Mhm.
And I don't want to make it any worse, was just really interesting. And I also think, like, another point I wanted to sort of circle back on, because you talked a bit about how, like Cammy in particular, she was able to kind of project an image that worked for herself, which the other characters at points do also, as
Mhm.
well, is kind of a mirror for Stephen Bard, who, again, it's not a spoiler because it's the very first, he has the very first chapter where
Mhm.
it's like he's definitely like looked at as the weird kid, but he kind of is able to mold his image into something that ends up working in his favor, like, when it comes to dating, when it comes to getting these jobs. So, I mean, they really are kind of standing on opposite ends of the mirror with, here's a thing I can project that helps me to a degree. And the other side of that, well, this got me this far, and now I'm able to do pay to stay, but we're opposing. And like, who does want to go into being a CO for pay to stay? Who
Mhm.
ends up there? And I thought that that was really interesting and really well done.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a way that the system, capital T, capital S, is incredibly abusive. And to then take that abuse and personify it into a person, suddenly we're like, Bard's reprehensible. He's a horrible person. I'm so glad he's dead.
Oh,
And
he's a
I'm
he's
like,
a he's a terrible person. It was just
mhm,
very interesting how, like, you read how he went from being like this, kid that everyone's like, we're keeping an eye on you, to like suddenly figuring out how to charm people
mhm.
later in life, and get dates. And I'm like, whoa, not what I was expecting.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, like, I think Follow Me is such a shiny book, and it's a hooky book, and it's, Instagram and shiny and Target and crafts. I would just want to say to anybody listening, if you come along for this book, I'm so grateful because I know it's such a shift from, my first book. And so even when I was writing those Bard characters that happen at the jump, it was very much just like, oh my God, he's so off-putting. Will anybody make it past the prologue? I mean, my brilliant editor, Selena, she said, I think we have to make his chapter one a prologue so people know that this isn't going to be the whole book, because I don't want to read a whole book from this guy's perspective. And I was like, that's a really good note. Let's make it a prologue. But I think the idea that once you personify the system into a person, you think this person's terrible. He's so mean. He never lets them go. He never lets them breathe. He's breathing down their neck. And I'm like, that's what the system does. So if you don't like how he behaves, then you also should have a problem with the system that we've set up, because it does the same thing.
When did you decide the period of time it was going to take place during? Because that was also just really well done, like a perfect like stretch of days.
I mean, I think part of it was just, if you only go Friday to Monday, that's not a lot of time. So I needed it to be a longer pocket of time. And then what would be a pocket of time where it was kind of like very pragmatic at first in terms of I just needed the days in the plot. But then secondarily, I think this way that like it is this weird week where everybody's like between January 26th or December 26th and January 2nd, it's like airport rules. You're having a pastrami sandwich at 7 a.m. There's day drinking. No one's getting dressed. Like people are sleeping everywhere. Like it's like this no man's land of time. And so I also felt like if that's an experience we all have where like time just kind of ceases to exist and you have no idea what's going on, I'm like, is that the closest sometimes people can get to that feeling of like, I'm just in this prison and like, I don't know what's going on. I just have to kind of wait it out. Like I wanted to find really kind of mainstream, straightforward things that everyone's experienced that would allow the reader to perhaps have more empathy, awareness to what the characters were experiencing.
So where do you go from here? Are you making another shift with your next book?
That's a really good question. I am developing some short stories to possibly take to TV, which would be fun. One is like a very kind of Big Little Lies type murder mystery, which is really fun, and I'm enjoying that very much. Another one that's really quiet is a kind of like near future story that I wrote, that as I wrote it, I mean, this short story, it became 65 pages. And a very trusted reader just said, like, this is great, but all I'm thinking is this needs to be longer. It needs to be the world is deep. The sentences hint at things that you can't pay off because you don't have the pages. So I'm going to explore those as well into books. And then the other books that I have planned, and I'm just kind of hopefully setting meetings and stuff with my editor soon to organize what would come next. This is what I've realized is my process is like, which sounds so bougie and snotty, but I'm sorry, it is. I like to find a societal question. I like to find something thorny and yucky that's kind of unwieldy to deal with and pull it into this really kind of like popcorn thriller murder mystery place, but while also like under the surface being like, okay, but this is all real. Like this is all happening. Why can you engage with it so easily when the stakes are so heightened, but like it's happening in your town? So that was a big part of it. That's what
I'm
leads me to my next things.
looking forward to everything you write. Hopefully, we will be talking again very soon.
I would love that, Jessica. Thank you so much for having me back. It was a pleasure to see your face come up on screen. I was so happy to see you.
It was a pleasure to see you as well, and a pleasure to see that you had another book in store. So check out Payback and read about the whole pay to stay system because it's really interesting, and not a lot of people know that it exists.
Yeah, and I hope people also read, my author's note at the end, because I really wanted to make sure that people understood this is a system that's so deeply broken, but we do already have alternatives, and we just need to actually decide that everyone's worthy of them as opposed to just some people.
Agreed. Absolutely. All right. This was Jessica with Syosset Libraries Turn the Page podcast. My guest was
Elizabeth Rose Quinn and my large dog who's barking in the background. Jessica, thank you so much for having me.
We don't hear them I don't hear your dog at all, so you're good.
Okay.
All right. We are going to close this chapter of Turn the Page.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.